There was a time when the entire East Coast feared one Mafia King, until a single betrayal left him trapped in a wheelchair, abandoned by everyone who once swore loyalty. But while his beautiful fiancée quietly waited for him to die, one ordinary maid kept treating him like a king, never knowing she was about to become the most powerful queen the Blackwood Empire had ever seen. Damien Blackwood did not fall in battle. He fell in silence, inside his own mansion, while the people who once bowed to him began counting the days until he stopped breathing. Once, his name ruled the East Coast Mafia Empire like a cold command. Men lowered their eyes when he entered. Enemies changed cities when his car passed their street. Damien was the king no one questioned, the shadow behind every deal, every port, every whisper of power and control. But after the assassination attempt, everything changed. The bullet had missed his heart, but it stole half his body, leaving him trapped in a wheelchair while doctors spoke over him like he was already gone. They said he would never fully recover. They said his nerves were damaged beyond repair. They said the empire needed a new hand before war swallowed it whole. Damien heard every word. His face remained still, but inside, his heart was pounding with a rage his body could not obey. His mansion, once alive with footsteps, loyalty, and fear, became a cold museum of waiting. Servants moved carefully through the halls. Guards avoided his eyes. Business calls came less often. Old allies began delaying answers. Betrayal did not arrive with a scream. It arrived softly, politely, dressed as concern. And Vanessa Sterling, his beautiful fiancée, became the sharpest silence of all. Before the attack, she had stood close to him in diamonds and silk, calling him mine in front of powerful men. Now she barely entered his room. When she did, she wore perfume too sweet for grief and smiled like patience was a performance. She stopped asking if he was in pain. She stopped touching his hand. Sometimes, she stood near the window and spoke about inheritance laws in a careless whisper, as if Damien's ears had died with his legs. Every servant noticed. No one dared say it. Fear spread through the mansion, not fear of Damien anymore, but fear of what would happen when the king finally disappeared. His empire was collapsing outside the gates, and inside them, his own future wife was waiting to wear his crown. Then Evelyn Brooks arrived. She was the new maid, quiet, young, and plain in her black uniform. No one expected anything from her. The head housekeeper warned her never to look directly at Damien, never to speak unless ordered, never to linger close to the man everyone now treated like a burden. But Evelyn did look. On her first evening, she entered his room carrying a tray of soup that had already gone cold because no one cared enough to bring it earlier. Damien sat near the fireplace, his blanket fallen from one knee, his untouched food from lunch still on the side table. His jaw was tight. His eyes were dark. He looked like a king forced to watch his throne rot. Evelyn did not gasp. She did not pity him. She simply walked close, lowered her gaze respectfully, and fixed the blanket over his legs with careful hands. Then she replaced the cold tray, adjusted the fire, closed the curtains against the winter wind, and placed warm tea beside him. "You should be kept safe, sir," she whispered. Damien's fingers twitched against the armrest. It was small. Almost nothing. But he felt it like thunder. The next morning, Evelyn prepared his breakfast herself. She noticed he hated too much sugar. She noticed his left hand still worked better than his right. She noticed the room was always colder by the window and moved his chair closer to the fire without making him feel weak. She never treated him like a victim. She treated him like a man still worthy of being protected. For the first time in months, Damien wanted to breathe deeper. And from the doorway, Vanessa saw everything. Evelyn was kneeling beside Damien's wheelchair, respectfully adjusting the edge of his blanket like she served a king, not a corpse. Damien was watching her with a stillness Vanessa had not seen since before the attack. In that moment, jealousy quietly awakened. Evelyn Brooks had never imagined that one ordinary job application would place her inside the mansion of a man whose name carried more fear than any headline. She grew up in a quiet town outside Philadelphia, raised by a hard-working single mother who believed dignity mattered more than money. After her mother's passing, life became a constant struggle. Her younger brother, Noah, had been diagnosed with a rare neurological illness that required expensive treatment every month. Every paycheck Evelyn earned disappeared into hospital bills, prescriptions, and travel expenses. She accepted every shift she could find, never asking questions about wealthy employers. To her, Damien Blackwood was simply another patient trapped inside a lonely house. She knew nothing about mafia empires, hidden alliances, or the dangerous power attached to his name. She only knew that suffering looked the same whether someone lived in a small apartment or inside a mansion filled with marble and gold. The senior housekeeper tried to stop her on the second morning. Her worried eyes searched Evelyn's face before she quietly pulled her aside. Nobody volunteered to care for Mr. Blackwood anymore. Most servants completed their duties as quickly as possible before rushing out of his room. They believed sadness itself lived inside those walls. Some whispered the king had lost his soul after the attack. Others feared his silence more than his anger. A few even believed anyone who became too close to him would eventually lose everything. Evelyn simply smiled with quiet respect. She thanked the older woman for her concern but carried Damien's breakfast upstairs anyway. Inside the room, Damien remained exactly where she had left him the previous evening. His eyes rested on the large windows overlooking the frozen gardens, yet they seemed to focus on nothing at all. The room felt colder than the winter outside despite the burning fireplace. Evelyn opened the curtains slightly, allowing soft morning light to enter. She greeted him naturally, never forcing cheerful words or exaggerated sympathy. She adjusted the temperature, prepared his breakfast carefully, and spoke to him as though he had answered every sentence. Damien rarely responded. Sometimes only his eyes shifted toward her. Other times he remained completely still. Yet Evelyn never filled the silence with pity. She respected it. As the days passed, she quietly built a routine around him. Every afternoon she borrowed books from the mansion's enormous library and read aloud while arranging fresh flowers near the fireplace. She selected stories filled with courage, hope, and ordinary families rebuilding their lives after hardship. She never asked whether he enjoyed them. She simply continued reading, believing even silence deserved company. Occasionally she paused, smiled at an interesting passage, and continued as though sharing the story with an old friend rather than a man trapped inside his own body. When the physical therapist visited twice each week, Evelyn carefully memorized every safe exercise Damien was instructed to perform. On the remaining days she helped him repeat those gentle movements, encouraging every small effort without pressure. If his hand trembled, she patiently waited. If exhaustion appeared across his face, she stopped immediately. There was no frustration in her voice, only quiet loyalty to someone the rest of the estate had already abandoned. Somehow Damien's breathing always became slower whenever she entered the room. The constant tension across his shoulders eased. Instead of staring endlessly at the ceiling, he now watched Evelyn moving around the room as she straightened books, arranged blankets, or prepared tea. Without realizing it, he had begun waiting for her footsteps each morning. The servants noticed the change long before anyone spoke about it. Damien no longer refused every meal. The untouched trays disappeared less often. The doctors remarked that his pulse remained calmer during examinations. Even the security guards whispered that the king's room no longer felt haunted by hopelessness. Something inside the mansion had shifted. Nobody understood why, but everyone recognized that the atmosphere had become strangely safe whenever Evelyn was nearby. Vanessa noticed it too, and every quiet improvement deepened her irritation. She found excuses to enter Damien's room more frequently, only to discover Evelyn reading beside the fireplace or carefully assisting him with his exercises. From the doorway she watched the young maid speak naturally, completely ignoring the invisible distance everyone else maintained. Vanessa convinced herself Evelyn was crossing boundaries. A servant should never stand so close to the man who was supposed to belong only to her. Somewhere beneath her elegant smile, jealousy whispered a dangerous thought. Damien was mine before she arrived. That evening, while Evelyn helped Damien complete another gentle hand exercise, she wrapped her fingers softly around his to support the movement. For several silent seconds nothing happened. Then, without warning, Damien's fingers slowly tightened around her hand. Evelyn froze. So did Damien. The entire Blackwood estate believed Vanessa Sterling was standing beside Damien out of love, but behind every graceful smile lived a woman who had already buried him inside her mind. Every morning she appeared dressed in elegance, speaking softly before the staff, pretending to be the loyal fiancé caring for a fallen king. Yet every evening after the mansion settled into silence, another version of Vanessa emerged. She slipped into the private conference room hidden behind the library and held secret meetings through encrypted video calls with men whose names were never spoken inside the estate. They were rival mafia leaders who had spent years trying to weaken the Blackwood Empire. Now, instead of fighting Damien openly, they were patiently waiting for Vanessa to finish what they had started. During one meeting, Vanessa calmly reminded them that the assassination attempt had succeeded far better than expected. Damien had survived, but only as a shadow of the ruler he once was. She smiled with chilling confidence and assured them he would never recover enough to reclaim his empire. Once the final legal documents were signed, Every valuable shipping route, investment and hidden account would quietly fall under her control. Vanessa no longer viewed Damien as the man she had promised to marry. She viewed him as the final obstacle between herself and absolute power. Whenever no servants were nearby, she entered his room without warmth or respect. She walked past his wheelchair without greeting him, removed family photographs from the shelves one by one, and replaced them with expensive decorations that reflected only her own taste. The portrait of Damien standing beside his late parents disappeared first. Then photographs of childhood memories, old victories, and trusted friends quietly vanished from the walls. She wanted every reminder of his past erased until nothing remained except a helpless man sitting alone inside a luxurious prison. Sometimes she stood behind him and whispered coldly that the world had already forgotten its king. She reminded him that powerful men respected movement, not memories, and that no empire could survive under someone who could barely lift a hand. Damien could not answer, but his eyes never left hers. Behind their silence burned a truth Vanessa refused to acknowledge. His spirit had not surrendered. Her greed soon reached beyond the mansion. Believing Damien would never regain control, Vanessa secretly began selling confidential Blackwood assets through trusted intermediaries. Hidden financial records, coded shipping schedules, secure warehouse locations, and confidential agreements slowly found their way into rival hands. Every signature strengthened her influence while weakening Damien's foundation. She convinced herself that once everything belonged to her, she would become the unquestioned queen of the East Coast. Loyalty meant nothing to her anymore. Betrayal had become her greatest investment. Evelyn discovered the truth entirely by accident. One rainy afternoon she carried fresh towels toward the guest corridor when she heard familiar voices drifting through the slightly open library door. She intended to leave quietly, but Damien's name stopped her footsteps. Remaining hidden behind the hallway wall, she listened as Vanessa confidently discussed the failed assassination attempt and complained that keeping Damien alive had become inconvenient. She admitted that she had provided information about his travel schedule months earlier because removing him was the fastest path toward complete control of the empire. The rival leaders praised her patience and assured her that Damien's remaining supporters would eventually disappear once the estate belonged to her completely. Evelyn's heart began pounding so loudly she feared they would hear it. Every word shattered the image she had believed. The woman pretending to protect Damien had been planning his downfall from the very beginning. As Evelyn quietly stepped away from the doorway, one of the guards exiting the library noticed movement at the end of the corridor. Their eyes briefly met before Evelyn lowered her head and continued walking. She forced herself to remain calm, but fear wrapped around every breath. She understood enough to realize she had become the only living witness capable of exposing Vanessa's betrayal. From that moment forward, danger surrounded her without a single threat being spoken aloud. When Evelyn entered Damien's room later that evening, her trembling hands could barely hold the tray. She tried to smile, but her voice lacked its usual warmth. Damien immediately noticed the change. His sharp eyes searched her frightened expression before shifting toward the closed door as though silently asking what had happened. Evelyn attempted to continue reading from her book, yet the words blurred before her eyes. Damien slowly reached toward her with the little strength he possessed. His fingers barely moved, but his desperate gaze said everything his voice could not. He understood she had learned something dangerous. More importantly, he understood she was considering leaving the estate to save herself. His eyes silently begged her to stay close. They pleaded for one thing only: do not leave me alone. Outside the room, hidden in the shadows of the hallway, another servant quietly opened the medicine cabinet reserved only for Damien. Looking around to ensure no one was watching, the figure removed a tiny glass vial and allowed several clear drops to disappear into Damien's evening medicine before closing the bottle exactly where it had been. The following morning began with an unsettling silence that Evelyn had never felt before. Every day she prepared Damien's breakfast and medicine exactly the same way, yet something felt different as she lifted the small glass bottle from the silver tray. The liquid inside carried a faint scent she had never noticed before. It was almost impossible to detect, but years of caring for her younger brother had taught her to question even the smallest change in medication. Her heart started pounding. She looked toward Damien, whose calm eyes remained fixed on her. Without saying a word, she quietly set the medicine aside instead of offering it to him. A few minutes later another servant entered, asking why the medicine had not been given. Evelyn answered naturally that Damien wished to eat first. The servant hesitated for a brief second before leaving the room, and that single moment made her fear grow even stronger. Unable to ignore her instincts, Evelyn secretly carried a tiny sample of the medicine to the estate's elderly physician under the excuse that she was worried about a change in dosage. The doctor examined it privately using a portable testing kit kept inside his office. As the color of the testing strip slowly darkened, the old man's face lost every trace of confidence. He immediately locked the office door and lowered his voice to a nervous whisper. The medicine had been altered. It contained a slow-acting poison designed to weaken Damien gradually without attracting immediate suspicion. The doctor admitted someone inside the mansion wanted the king to disappear quietly. He begged Evelyn to tell no one because exposing the truth without proof would place both of them in terrible danger. Evelyn left the office feeling as though the entire mansion had become a trap. She barely returned to Damien's room before the peaceful estate transformed. Emergency alarms echoed through the corridors. Security radios erupted with hurried voices reporting unknown intruders inside the eastern wing. Loyal guards rushed toward the entrances while frightened servants locked themselves inside nearby rooms. Nobody understood how the attackers had crossed the heavily protected perimeter, yet one fact became clear almost instantly. Someone from inside had opened the gates. Betrayal had finally reached the heart of the Blackwood estate. Fear spread faster than the alarms themselves. Damien's remaining loyal bodyguards formed a protective circle around his room, determined to delay the advancing intruders long enough for him to escape. One after another they disappeared into the smoke-filled hallways without hesitation, fulfilling the oath they had sworn years earlier to protect their king. Their voices gradually faded into the distance until only silence remained. Evelyn understood what their sacrifice meant. Every passing minute had been purchased for Damien with extraordinary loyalty. Without waiting for instructions, Evelyn locked the bedroom door, hurried behind Damien's bookshelf, and pressed the hidden mechanism she had accidentally discovered while dusting weeks earlier. A narrow stone passage slowly revealed itself beneath the moving wall. The Blackwood family had built emergency tunnels decades ago for moments exactly like this. Evelyn carefully released the wheelchair brakes and pushed Damien into the hidden passage before sealing the entrance behind them. The underground tunnel was dimly lit, cold, and completely silent except for the sound of the wheelchair rolling across ancient stone. Every echo made Evelyn glance over her shoulder, expecting footsteps to appear behind them at any moment. As they moved deeper beneath the estate, Damien never looked away from her. He watched the determination on her face as she navigated every narrow turn despite having every reason to save herself instead. She knew nothing about his empire. She owed him nothing beyond a paycheck. Yet she had refused to abandon him even after learning the truth surrounding his life. For the first time since the assassination attempt, Damien felt something stronger than survival. He felt safe. Not because the tunnel protected him, but because the woman pushing his wheelchair valued his life more than power, money, or control. She had chosen loyalty when everyone else had chosen convenience. She was not a victim of the chaos surrounding the Blackwood name. Every decision she made proved she was becoming stronger with every challenge placed before her. Eventually they reached an underground chamber where the tunnel divided into several hidden exits leading beyond the estate grounds. Evelyn stopped only long enough to catch her breath. Her hands trembled from exhaustion, but she immediately reached for the wheelchair again, determined to keep moving until Damien was completely safe. As she leaned closer to adjust the blanket around his shoulders, Damien slowly lifted his shaking hand toward hers. His fingers wrapped weakly around her wrist, stopping her for just a moment. His lips struggled to move after months of silence. With enormous effort, a single hoarse word escaped into the darkness. Stay. The small underground safe house hidden beyond the Blackwood estate became the place where hope quietly returned. Far from the eyes of enemies, Damien Blackwood no longer lived beneath the weight of constant judgment. Every sunrise marked another careful attempt to reclaim what the assassination had stolen. His recovery remained painfully slow, but it was no longer impossible. Evelyn refused to measure progress by miracles. She celebrated every finger that responded, every longer breath, every second he remained standing with assistance. She reminded him that even the strongest king had once learned to take his first step. Her calm confidence never sounded forced. It simply became the steady rhythm that carried him forward when frustration threatened to pull him back. The physicians trusted by the Blackwood family were secretly brought to the safe house one by one under complete secrecy. They examined Damien without the pressure of Vanessa's influence or manipulated medical reports. After weeks of observation, the oldest neurologist finally reached a conclusion that changed everything. Damien's condition had never been hopeless. His recovery had been intentionally underestimated. Proper treatment, determination, and consistent rehabilitation could restore far more movement than anyone had dared believe. The poison had delayed his progress, but it had not destroyed it. For the first time since the assassination attempt, Damien looked toward the future instead of staring at the past. His heart was pounding, not from fear but from possibility. Evelyn became the quiet force behind every improvement. She adjusted each exercise according to the doctor's instructions, encouraged him through moments of exhaustion, and refused to let disappointment settle inside the room. Some mornings Damien struggled to lift his arm. Other days he managed several careful steps supported by parallel bars built inside the rehabilitation room. Whenever frustration crossed his face, Evelyn simply smiled and reminded him how far he had already come. She never praised him like a patient. She believed in him as a leader waiting to stand again. Without realizing it, Damien began looking for her before every therapy session. Her presence made every difficult task feel strangely safe. While Damien rebuilt his strength, quiet movements spread across the East Coast. The captains who had remained loyal to the Blackwood name received coded messages delivered through trusted couriers. One after another they disappeared from public view before gathering secretly inside abandoned warehouses, private vineyards, and forgotten harbors. They had never accepted Vanessa's growing authority. They had only waited for proof that their king still lived. Every meeting ended with the same silent promise. The empire would not belong to traitors. Loyalty had survived beneath the ashes, and preparations quietly began for the inevitable war that everyone knew was approaching. Rumors soon reached Vanessa despite her careful control over information. Trusted allies suddenly stopped answering her calls. Business partners delayed important agreements. Entire shipping routes she believed belonged to her were quietly returning to Blackwood influence. No one openly challenged her, yet she could feel control slipping through her fingers. She responded by accelerating every hidden scheme she had already begun. More confidential records disappeared. More desperate promises were made to rival families. She convinced herself Damien could never return before her plans reached completion, but for the first time uncertainty entered her thoughts. Fear had quietly replaced confidence. Inside the safe house, Damien's own authority returned just as silently. He no longer hesitated when discussing the future of the empire with his captains through encrypted meetings. His voice remained soft from months of silence, yet every decision carried the calm certainty that had once made powerful men obey without question. The room naturally followed his direction. No title needed repeating. The king was returning. Through every conversation, every exercise, and every difficult day, Evelyn remained at his side. Damien gradually stopped questioning her motives because every action answered the question before it formed. She never sought recognition, influence, or reward. She protected him because she believed his life mattered. When uncertainty surrounded him, she became the one place where his mind finally rested. He found himself trusting her with thoughts he shared with no captain, no advisor, and no physician. Somewhere between quiet mornings and determined evenings, an emotional bond formed without either of them naming it. Whenever Evelyn stepped into the room, Damien's breathing steadied. Whenever she smiled, the future no longer seemed unreachable. In the privacy of his own heart, one impossible thought returned again and again. She is safe. She is close. She is mine. Late one evening, while reviewing a sealed archive box rescued from the Blackwood estate, Damien discovered an old photograph tucked inside a faded security file. His eyes widened as he recognized the man standing beside his late father decades earlier. Turning the photograph over, he read the handwritten name in silence. Thomas Brooks, Evelyn's father. The man who had once saved his father's life. Vanessa Sterling understood that time was no longer on her side. The hidden reports reaching her every hour painted a terrifying picture. Damien Blackwood was alive, recovering, and quietly rebuilding the loyalty she believed had died with his broken body. Every captain who stopped answering her calls confirmed the same frightening truth. The king was returning. Refusing to lose everything she had sacrificed for, Vanessa abandoned every remaining disguise. She secretly activated the final stage of her alliance, inviting rival syndicates to strike the weakened Blackwood Empire all at once. If Damien survived this attack, her dream of absolute power would disappear forever. If he fell now, history would remember her as the grieving woman who inherited an empire instead of the architect of its destruction. Before dawn, encrypted signals reached hidden operatives across the East Coast. Within hours, heavily armed convoys surrounded abandoned warehouses, shipping docks, and Blackwood-controlled businesses. Secure communication lines suddenly went silent. Loyal commanders realized this was no ordinary raid. It was a coordinated attempt to erase the Blackwood name completely. The old mansion, recently reclaimed by Damien's remaining supporters, became the symbolic heart of the coming war. Emergency alarms echoed through every corridor as trusted guards secured entrances and evacuated innocent staff members. The air itself seemed heavy with fear as everyone understood that the future of the Empire would be decided before another sunrise arrived. Damien stood inside the restored command room supported by a polished cane rather than his wheelchair. His strength had returned steadily, yet long hours of movement still exhausted him. Every step demanded determination, and every breath reminded him that recovery remained unfinished. Even so, his presence transformed the atmosphere. Captains who had once feared the Empire was lost straightened their shoulders the moment he entered. Orders flowed calmly from Damien's lips, restoring control that had been missing for months. He no longer sounded like a patient fighting for survival. He sounded like the king they had sworn to follow. Evelyn remained beside him despite every opportunity to escape. Several loyal bodyguards quietly urged her to leave through the underground tunnels while safe routes still existed. She refused every suggestion without hesitation. She had already chosen where she belonged. Protecting Damien no longer felt like duty alone. It had become part of her heart. She calmly organized medical supplies, reassured frightened household staff, and stayed close whenever Damien's strength began fading. Looking at her, Damien understood something he had never experienced even during the height of his empire. Absolute trust could not be purchased with money or demanded through fear. It was earned through unwavering loyalty. Outside the estate, loyal Blackwood soldiers emerged from hidden safe houses across the city. Convoys carrying trusted men arrived one after another, surrounding the mansion with disciplined precision. Veterans who had served Damien's father stood beside younger captains who had never known defeat under Blackwood leadership. No speeches were needed. Their presence alone declared that the Empire had not surrendered. The battle for influence spread rapidly through business districts, private ports, financial offices, and secure compounds as both sides struggled to reclaim strategic control. It was no longer a conflict over territory alone. It was a struggle over legacy, loyalty, and the future of the Blackwood name. Watching reports arrive from every direction, Vanessa realized Damien's supporters were stronger than she had expected. Panic quietly replaced confidence. Desperate to break Damien emotionally instead of militarily, she gave one final order before disappearing from the estate. Her remaining followers intercepted Evelyn while she was transporting confidential medical files between safe locations. By the time Damien learned she had vanished, only her abandoned scarf remained near one of the underground exits. The realization struck him harder than any betrayal he had endured. His steady expression finally cracked. His breathing became uneven, his heart pounding as he searched every report for one answer alone. The Empire could be rebuilt. Power could be reclaimed. But the thought of losing Evelyn awakened something far deeper than leadership. His voice echoed across the command room with a force no one had heard since before the assassination. Find her. The room fell completely silent. Damien slowly raised his eyes toward every captain who had gathered beneath the Blackwood crest. They touched what is mine. His gaze hardened with absolute certainty. Before sunrise, every rival family that stands behind this betrayal will fall. Evelyn refused to believe that captivity meant defeat. The abandoned coastal estate where Vanessa's followers kept her was designed to frighten prisoners into obedience, but Evelyn watched instead of panicking. She listened to every careless conversation, memorized guard routines, observed security changes, and quietly noticed which employees had been forced to remain there against their will. Among them were cooks, cleaners, drivers, and office assistants who had served the Blackwood family for years. They were frightened, not disloyal. Evelyn realized escaping alone would save one life, but exposing the truth could save an entire empire. Her heart was pounding, yet her thoughts remained calm. She remembered Damien's determination during recovery and understood that courage often began with patience rather than action. One evening she noticed accountants entering Vanessa's temporary office carrying encrypted ledgers and digital storage drives. Curious whispers revealed that Vanessa intended to erase every financial record connecting her to rival syndicates before disappearing forever. While the guards celebrated what they believed was inevitable victory, Evelyn quietly gained access to the office by volunteering to organize damaged files after a water pipe leaked through the ceiling. Working carefully, she discovered confidential agreements, hidden offshore accounts, payment records tied to the assassination attempt, and signed documents proving Vanessa had secretly sold Blackwood assets months earlier. Instead of destroying the evidence, Evelyn copied everything onto a secure drive and photographed critical pages with an old backup phone hidden inside the storage room. Every file exposed another layer of betrayal and confirmed that Vanessa had traded loyalty for absolute power. Before leaving the office, Evelyn noticed several frightened household employees locked inside an unused conference hall. They had refused to cooperate with Vanessa and were being held until the conflict ended. Rather than fleeing immediately, Evelyn quietly unlocked the service entrance using an access card she had recovered earlier. She organized the staff into small groups, guided them through forgotten maintenance corridors, and led them toward emergency exits connected to neighboring buildings. No panic spread because Evelyn remained calm. Her steady voice became the safe place everyone followed. She protected innocent lives without drawing unnecessary attention, proving that true strength often appeared in quiet decisions instead of dramatic moments. When Evelyn finally reached the Blackwood Command Center with the financial evidence, every loyal captain gathered around the conference table fell silent. Damien accepted the storage drive without speaking while forensic specialists verified every document. One by one the screens filled with undeniable proof. Vanessa's hidden transactions, secret communications, and illegal transfers appeared before the leadership of the Empire. The room that had once questioned Evelyn's presence now looked at her with unmistakable respect. Veteran captains who had spent decades earning their reputations stood and acknowledged her loyalty without hesitation. They no longer saw a maid standing beside their king. They saw the woman whose courage had protected the future of the Blackwood name. Vanessa was brought before the council expecting to defend herself with carefully prepared lies, but the evidence destroyed every excuse before she could speak. Damien calmly addressed the assembled leaders with complete authority restored. His voice carried the quiet certainty that had once united the Empire. He declared that Vanessa had willingly abandoned every promise she had ever made, choosing betrayal over loyalty and personal ambition over the people who had trusted her. Before every captain, advisor, and family representative, Damien formally ended their engagement. No anger colored his words. Only finality remained. The woman who wanted to become queen through deception had lost every claim to the Blackwood legacy. As silence settled across the chamber, every eye naturally turned toward Evelyn. She had entered the mansion as an unnoticed maid carrying nothing except determination and compassion. Now the entire empire recognized what Damien had understood long before anyone else. She was not a victim carried forward by luck. She became powerful because every difficult choice strengthened her character instead of breaking it. Her influence came from integrity rather than fear, from loyalty rather than control, and from protecting others rather than ruling over them. Without seeking a title, she had earned authority that no one questioned. Damien slowly walked across the chamber until he stood only a step away from her. The room held its breath as the king looked into Evelyn's eyes with complete certainty. Then, before every mafia leader who had gathered beneath the Blackwood crest, Damien lowered himself onto one knee. Here is the final section in your requested style. Bold heading only, paragraph narration under 700 words, your latest instruction says every heading must stay below 700 words. Cinematic pacing, emotional ending, no repeated scenes, and a strong YouTube-style closing. The ancient council hall of the Blackwood estate had witnessed generations of powerful decisions, but none compared to the morning when every surviving captain, ally, and rival representative gathered beneath the Blackwood crest. The long months of betrayal, fear, and uncertainty had finally reached their end. Vanessa Sterling stood before the council with every secret exposed. The financial records, encrypted messages, hidden agreements, and testimonies from those she had manipulated formed an undeniable truth. She had not simply betrayed Damien. She had betrayed every principle that had held the empire together for decades. The silence surrounding her carried greater weight than any accusation. She realized too late that power built on deception could never survive against loyalty earned through sacrifice. Across the chamber, representatives from the rival syndicates quietly lowered their eyes. They had entered the conflict believing the Blackwood Empire had become permanently divided. Instead, they found a united leadership stronger than before. Damien's recovery, the return of his loyal captains, and Evelyn's courage had transformed what was meant to be the Empire's final chapter into its greatest rebirth. One after another, rival leaders accepted formal peace under strict Blackwood terms. They surrendered disputed routes, restored stolen business holdings, and recognized Damien's authority without further challenge. The war that had threatened to consume everything ended not through destruction but through undeniable leadership. The East Coast once again recognized only one king. Damien stood before his people without the wheelchair that had once symbolized his darkest days. Months of determination, careful rehabilitation, and unwavering support had restored both his strength and his confidence. His steps were steady, his voice calm, and his presence filled the chamber exactly as it had before the assassination attempt. Yet those closest to him noticed one important difference. The man who had once ruled through distance now understood the value of trust. His greatest victory had never been reclaiming the empire. It had been discovering the person who refused to abandon him when he possessed nothing except hope. Still standing on one knee before Evelyn, Damien looked into her eyes with complete certainty. His heart was pounding, not from battle or danger, but from a future he finally wished to embrace. The room waited in complete silence as he spoke words every person present would remember for the rest of their lives. He admitted that titles, wealth, and influence had once convinced him that loyalty could be purchased. Evelyn had proven otherwise. She had protected him when he could not protect himself. She had stood close when others walked away. She had made him feel safe when even his own home had become unfamiliar. Then, before every witness, Damien asked her to remain beside him not as a servant, not as an employee, but as his partner for the rest of his life. Tears gathered quietly in Evelyn's eyes as she accepted. She had entered the estate carrying cleaning supplies and worries about her younger brother's future. She never sought recognition or authority. She simply chose compassion every time fear offered an easier path. Looking across the hall, she recognized many of the servants who had once worked beside her. Some smiled proudly. Others wiped away tears, remembering the young maid who had quietly adjusted a fallen blanket for a forgotten king when nobody else believed he still mattered. Their respect meant as much to Evelyn as the crown she never expected to receive. Damien gently took her hand and turned toward the assembled council. His voice echoed through the chamber with quiet strength. He declared that when everyone abandoned him, only one woman remained loyal without asking for reward. Only one woman protected the king before anyone believed he could stand again. Only one woman deserved to stand beside him as queen of the Blackwood Empire. The hall answered with unanimous respect as every captain lowered his head in acknowledgement. From that day forward, people no longer remembered Evelyn Brooks as the maid who entered the mansion unnoticed. They remembered her as the queen who proved that true power begins with loyalty, that real control comes from compassion, and that the strongest empire is built by two hearts protecting one another. And whenever future generations whispered the story of King Damien Blackwood, they always ended it the same way. A king reclaimed his empire. A queen changed its soul. And together they made sure no loyal heart would ever stand alone again. Some people believe power builds an empire, but stories like this remind us that loyalty is what keeps it alive. If this journey stayed with you even for a moment, let this story reach someone else who still believes courage can change a life. And if you enjoy powerful cinematic stories where loyalty is tested, betrayal has consequences, and ordinary people become unforgettable heroes, make sure you're here for the next one. Before you go, answer me honestly. When Damien had nothing left, his power, his empire, even the people he trusted, who do you think truly saved him? Evelyn's loyalty, or the hope she gave him to stand again? And if you were Damien, would you have trusted her with your empire and your heart? Tell me why in the comments.